Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to today's event, Collaborating to Make It Better, Lessons from Biz Hub. My name is Greg Lockwood and I'm a research associate at the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, a nonprofit social policy research and evaluation organization. I'm also one of the project team members with the Biz Hub project. On your screen, you should be able to see the 4 Biz Hub project team members. I know many of you are already familiar with Biz Hub, but for those who are not, Biz Hub is a 3-year research and innovation project funded by the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and it's why we're gathered here today. So at this point, I'm going to really briefly go over a few webinar housekeeping items so that we can get right into the exciting details and lessons from Biz Hub. So along with seeing the faces of the Biz Hub project team, I'm going to turn on the webcam for just a minute. And hopefully you can see us here at our office in Vancouver. So hi folks, I'm Greg. Beside me is Haley, our colleague here, and then I'm going to pan over to Chris and Susanna and Barbara.
Hi.
There you go. So today's forum is 1 hour in length, and we intend to leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions and discussion. We really encourage you to submit any questions and comments using the questions feature on your panel, and we will address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. So today's forum is being recorded. If you cannot stay for the duration, know that you will receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email. We will also be sending out the slide deck. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Susanna to kick things off.
Thank you, Greg. It's really hard to believe we're at the end of this project. The project team, Greg, Barbara, and I have worked with 30 incredible participants from employment service agencies across BC, including Chris, who is with us today. Through this collaboration, we all learned with and from each other. We had active and open participation, and without it, we would not have been able to implement this very exciting and innovative project. Biz Hub was launched in February 2016. It was a 3-year research and innovation project. It was carried out by the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, a division of SRDC. The project brought together employment service providers across BC to address business process issues in small groups of practitioners or sub-hubs where they work together to identify and develop strategies to improve specific processes. You'll hear more about these sub-hubs in a few minutes, but for the time being, think of them as working groups. The main project goals were, they were quite simple, to improve business processes, to raise capacity of practitioners, and through the process, it provided a framework and tools for collaborative problem solving. You'll hear more about the innovations developed and implemented, but I want to begin by saying that these small innovations or nudges made a positive difference within organizations. However, we want you to be aware of the difference between a nudge and a hunch. A nudge is an innovation that is developed from evidence. It is data-driven. A hunch is something you try and hope for the best. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Biz Hub used nudges developed from evidence of best practices and organizational data. What you need to know before my colleagues start speaking is that the approach worked. And some of the most important impacts of Biz Hub in organizations is that it created an intentional space for collaborative and creative problem solving. It empowered practitioners with resources, tools, and support to identify and solve business process issues. It increased capacity of practitioners who were involved. It implemented strategies that resulted in impacts, some that were even tested and determined to be significant. So in the next hour, you will hear from my colleagues more about these nudges and their impacts. Since we're only able to touch on the highlights from this 3-year project in this hour, we will provide you with a link to a resource page for more information at the end of the project, including the forthcoming report. I'd like to turn it over now to my colleague, Barbara.
Okay, right. So Susanna's told you something about the goals for Biz Hub, and I'm going to take some time to tell you how we went about achieving these goals. The framework developed for Biz Hub was designed to support, as you see from the slide, systematic, creative and collaborative problem solving. And we've chosen these words very carefully. We worked with the participants to systematically identify and address issues. This process was very much a collaboration. It was not researchers coming in with a preconceived agenda. Instead, we drew on the knowledge, experience and expertise of participants. We provided evidence of best practice, and we enabled participants to share their insights and to collaborate. We encourage participants to think outside the box when developing the innovation or the nudge. This diagram shows that for each sub-hub, our approach was to put the client or the user at the center of our deliberations, and then to use organizational data and other evidence to understand what was happening and to address the issue. The participants, as Susanna said, collaborated and developed the innovations. So what we are presenting here today is based on the hard work of many. One way to view Biz Hub is as a hub and spoke model. There was a main hub, which was envisaged as a central gathering place for participating organizations and a way of exchanging new knowledge and evidence created by the sub-hubs. You see from this slide that there were 4 sub-hubs, and each sub-hub explored a different issue. You see here client engagement, staff capacity, and employer engagement. The sub-hubs consisted of approximately 8 participants from a range of employment service and service-related organisations from across BC. They met once a month for about 6 months to explore and problem-solve issues around, for example, client engagement or staff engagement. The sub-hubs all began with an all-day in-person meeting, and the subsequent meetings were online and lasted about an hour and a half. And the meetings were very well attended throughout. So you see that each sub-hub focused on a specific business problem. The participants in the sub-hub agreed on which aspects to focus on. Greg and Chris are going to tell you more about these in a few minutes. However, regardless of the focus, the process and the goals were the same: to develop improvements or nudges that were data and evidence-based, that were low cost, and that had the potential to be scalable, so that if they were found to be useful, they could be used by other organizations to produce consistent outcomes. So that's what Biz Hub looked like. How did we go about achieving this? We did this by using the following approach. We used a combination of business process management, behavioral insights, and design thinking to develop the innovations or nudges. And I'm just going to tell you very briefly, give you a quick overview of each of these. So first, business process management. Businesses use this approach because they know how important processes are. They know that how you do something affects the outcome. You have to understand and manage these processes, and this is true for businesses and nonprofits. So BPM is a methodology that improves processes to ensure they are efficient and effective and result in a better and more efficient organization, a better experience, and better outcomes for clients. And there's a number of different ways of examining the processes. We used business process mapping and mapped out what was happening alongside what was supposed to happen in order to identify the factors which contributed to bottlenecks. And by the end of the process, each sub-hub knew the common bottlenecks, and then participants took this information and were encouraged to go back to their own organizations to discuss and explore them using their own organizational data. And this process helped to ensure organizational buy-in. To design the interventions, you see we use behavioral insights. Within the policy world, there's been a lot of discussion about nudges. As you've heard, these are small changes to systems or services that make a difference to the way individuals use them. These small changes are often called nudges, and there's a whole science behind nudges. You might have heard about nudge theory. A nudge, just to remind you, is a small evidence-based change that affects the way individuals make decisions and ultimately how they behave. Nudge theory comes from behavioral insights and is being used by policymakers across the world to better understand how individuals behave and make decisions in the real world. So the essence of BI is that it acknowledges that individuals are not rational beings who always make rational decisions. Rather, the choices they make are influenced by a myriad of factors, including the context in which the choices are made. The goal of BI is to understand these factors and to help develop strategies that would persuade people to change their behavior. So just to give you an example, the people who developed nudge theory, Thaler and Sunstein, tell us that in order to count it as a nudge, the intervention must be cheap and easy, and nudges are not mandates. Putting fruit at eye level counts as a nudge, banning junk food does not. So in Biz Hub, we used behavioral insights to encourage participants to think of small changes that could be made to their business processes to improve them. And once the type of nudge was agreed, the project team worked with participants to identify how best to implement and evaluate changes. So the last one you see here is design thinking. We use this approach to help participants think outside the box to find creative solutions to the problem. So design thinking is generally described as an analytical and creative process that engages the person and encourages them to create and prototype and to gather feedback and redesign. And at the center of this process, the client. So people consider the design process from different perspectives. So using these approaches, participants were encouraged to focus on the outcomes they wanted to achieve and to review service delivery in terms of how current practices support or hinder the outcomes. And as Biz Hub progressed, we refined this approach into 4 key steps, which come from the behavioral insights literature. You'll see they are discovery, diagnose, design, and delivery. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of these. So the first, discovery, and this is about identifying the opportunities for service improvement. So for us, we use participant expertise and organizational data and knowledge of best practices to identify opportunities for service improvements. The second step, the diagnose, we identified bottlenecks by mapping out the business processes and examining them from both an organizational and client perspective. And in the third step, that's where you innovate and you approach to remove the bottlenecks. Participants collaboratively design the adaptations, and behavioral strategies were used to develop small, low-cost changes. The final step is the delivery. To deliver service improvements, we tested them in organizations and information was shared with sub-hub participants and then back to the main hub. So I'm going to let Greg tell you about the 4 sub-hubs and how they use these 4 steps to develop their nudges.
Thanks, Barbara. So in our discussions with service providers in our projects advisory committee, client engagement was identified as the first process to address. Specifically, the challenges for organizations, the challenge was that disengaged clients are less likely to attend appointments and to complete programs, thereby reducing the likelihood of obtaining employment. Therefore, developing strategies to improve client engagement was of genuine interest to organizations. So in this first sub-hub, 8 practitioners from around British Columbia came together to explore client engagement in both its initial stages and in its sustainment. We know from the literature that client engagement is a predictor of employment outcomes, as well as a likely predictor of improvements in personal attributes like self-esteem and self-efficacy. It's also something that is just really important to practitioners and clients. So you can see here in using the 4-stage process framework that in the discover stage, in this first sub-hub, the group members identified 2 major bottlenecks that they observed in their practice. And these were, one, that clients were not attending follow-up appointments. So clients often attended their first appointment, but attendance at subsequent appointments declined despite reminders being sent via the client's preferred communications channel. The implications of non-attendance were the lack of client movement towards employment and also staff downtime, as many clients did not call to reschedule appointments. And secondly, clients had literacy challenges. So some clients experienced challenges in understanding information and materials provided by the employment center and a failure to comply with action plans because of this. Clients that experienced the greatest difficulties tended to be immigrants and those with low levels of literacy. Within the employment centers, awareness of and supports for literacy challenges were inconsistent, and staff were not always aware of how to recognize literacy challenges in clients and then how to support those clients. So in the diagnosis stage, the practitioners mapped the client journey and used this information to identify attrition points and reasons the attrition occurred. They also used administrative data to support this stage. Next, in the design stage, research evidence we know has shown that changing the reminders sent to clients could improve attendance. The group agreed to focus on the personalization of reminders sent to clients because this was found to directly improve attendance rates in other research where adding the recipient and sender names and an element of reciprocity resulted in higher rates of attendance. So this sub-hub decided to try a similar approach. As a first step, participants provided the project team with examples of their existing reminder scripts or templates. And then when necessary, the project team provided support to help with the organization's, with the personalization of the text. The participants obtained approval from their organizations to trial these new reminder scripts and text. And then the project team designed an evaluation framework for this initiative, which consisted of what's called a natural experiment. This involved a before and after approach, with the before data acting as the control group and then the after as the intervention group. And the members collected data over about 1 month at their organizations. And the evaluation determined the impact by measuring the difference in the attendance of the before group and the attendance for the after group. So you can see on this next slide the results of that trial. We received data from 3 centers, and it showed the following: that the use of personalized reminders resulted in an increase in attendance at appointments of 10 percentage points. This result was shown to be statistically significant. There was also an 8 percentage point decrease in appointment no-shows, which you can see at the very right there. This result was also statistically significant. So the sub-hub participants were pleased and surprised by these results, since changes to the reminders were relatively small and straightforward to implement. The decline in no-shows was of particular interest, as no-shows equates to downtime for staff. So reducing this downtime meant that staff could arrange other appointments and engage in billable activities. So at this point, I'm going to pass the mic over to Chris, and Chris is going to share about NIAF's experience of implementing the new client appointment reminders.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. So just wanted to share a bit of our presence in the project here. So our involvement in the client engagement process was really simple. And in terms of what was involved, I just wanted to share that the Biz Hub team provided us with a proper Excel spreadsheet that broke down how we could implement these reminders within our office. And what that looked like was, within the first week, we used our existing traditional NIAF's appointment reminder scripts. The second week, we started to track the attendance from those appointment reminders. Going into the third week, we actually offered the new, more personalized approach that was implemented by participating in the sub-hub. And then in week 4, we started to track that attendance. And we noticed, but by offering a more personalized approach, we saw greater engagement from the clients in how they connected with our team for those appointments, attending those appointments and workshops, and we saw overall buy-in from the clients within our office. And some of the other things that we learned was our clients were thankful. We noted that some clients looked at our personalized scripts more as an invitation, and as we call them, they went on to thank us for that, and therefore helped with our engagement. And we also noticed from there that we could have those appointment reminders set up for not only clients' workshop appointments, but just general appointments and appointments for anything else we wanted to offer.
Great, thanks, Chris. So as mentioned, the second aspect addressed in the client engagement sub-hub was related to the literacy challenges and barriers experienced by some clients. Organizational data demonstrated the range of clients served included immigrants, people with disabilities, and vulnerable populations. To address these literacy barriers, the client engagement sub-hub worked collaboratively with the project team and Dakota Literacy Solutions to develop a literacy review. The literacy review was designed to identify the key barriers encountered by clients. As part of the literacy review, Dakota worked with the participating organizations to develop strategies to address these barriers by making relatively small changes to office environments, service delivery practices, and by providing training and resources to help frontline staff recognize if clients have low literacy issues. So the aim of the literacy review was to help clients obtain a better understanding of what they are being asked to do, in the hope that they would be more likely to comply, participate in, and complete programming. And the literacy review was designed to support staff in better serving clients, improve the client experience, and improve the information exchange between clients and the employment center staff, thereby improving the client engagement process. So essentially, the literacy review consisted of a 5-step process with participating organizations. You can see that process on your screen. So I'm going to pass it back over to Chris again to talk about implementing the literacy review at NIAFS.
Thanks, Greg. So our involvement saw just a general meeting with a representative from our local literacy association in Campbell River, as well as Greg from the Biz Hub team. And the first bit of involvement was a general staff meeting with our career advisors, where we could explain about the process a little more, so they were aware of what was going to happen that day. After that meeting, the next steps were to be a walking tour of the facility with the Biz Hub team, as well as Literacy Association, followed by an action plan that would be developed from there. And in terms of learning, our team saw right off the get-go that a lot of our clients do come across some literacy barriers during those appointments. And that was in the amount of text, the amount of paperwork that we see, even just posters and brochures within our office. And our staff got to see from there a little bit of a screenshot from the eyes of a person that has low literacy, so we could better understand everything that our clients were seeing. And from there, some of the changes that we implemented after we got our action plan back was we actually formed a literacy working group, so we could take that action plan, dissolve right into it, and actually address some of the things that came from that. And some of those pieces could be just cleaner, more simpler, plain language on our brochures and our informational material, just a proper welcome sign, so when a client comes into our building or a member of the public, they can see that our front desk is the first thing they see, and then from there, where things like washrooms and our resource center would be as well. So overall, we love taking part in that part.
Excellent, thanks, Chris. So moving on to Subhub number 2, again, 8 practitioners from employment services organizations across BC participated here as well. And the purpose of this Subhub was to work with the participants to find ways to improve employee engagement within organizations. So in the Discover stage, initial discussions identified that low staff engagement and staff turnover was problematic. So different aspects of staff engagement were discussed, and the Subhub participants agreed that a common area that could be improved across all participating organizations was internal communications. In the diagnose stage, the Biz Hub developed and implemented an online survey to examine internal communications. This survey was sent to all staff in the 8 participating organizations and examined what was and was not working in internal communications. We received about 250 responses to the survey from across the organizations, and we learned that overall, things were working quite well, but there was room for improvement across the organizations. Next, in the design stage, based on the survey results of the Subhub participants discussed how best to respond to the challenges within their own organizations. This was a very collaborative process with participants sharing different information and tools. Each organization tailored the nudges to best suit their context. So it wasn't possible to test the nudges as we'd done in Subhub 1, but instead participants implemented the nudge and sought feedback from their staff. And these nudges included innovations such as categorized emails, morning huddles, and a social message board. The Subhub participants were provided with a summary of the overall survey findings, as I mentioned, but what I want to get to next is that we learned that these innovations address specific concerns, so things like the morning huddle, the social message board, and there was a positive response from organizations and staff. And they also contributed to reductions in meeting length and frequency, and they reduced the volume of emails that were sent to staff. So again, back to Chris to discuss the changes that NIAFS has made in this area.
Thanks, Greg. So for our participation in this part of the hub, we saw within our office a good morning email go out to the team, and we sent it out fairly early in the morning. So as staff came in, they could see everything that was set up to happen that day, any bits of policy that needed to be shared, any notices from throughout the province that our staff needed to be made aware of, and that way staff could have a good picture of of everything they were coming into. Now, what we did notice, though, as time went on, that we saw this, it did work, but after a while, our staff saw it as just another email that was coming in. So we decided at that point to stop the process, but actually from there, offer emails as needed for bits of information that needs to come out. Some other pieces that we implemented from this stage was a staff huddle, and we saw this begin with our finance department, where the team leader would connect with the staff there to see who was taking on what projects during the day, who was assigned to certain tasks, and offer any support for any questions that would come out from there. And from there, we saw this also morph into our disability specialized team as well, where again, that staff could connect at least every other week to again discuss any program and policy changes that need to be made, any local information in the community that needed to be shared as well. And from there, we can actually take that method and apply it to really any other facet of the business, whether it's our career advisors, those that engage with employers, and even the leadership team.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm just going to pause here because we have a question that's come in, and we're ahead of schedule with our presentation today. So someone just asking about, we've mentioned in the first couple of sub-hubs that there was representation from across BC, and they're just wondering how exactly that looked, where folks were coming from, those that participated in the group. And I can tell you that for the Biz Hub project, we were really intentional about seeing representation from both urban and rural centers, as well as across the province. So there were folks from the north, from the interior, from the island. There were about 30 participants, and so we had to look at those that that submitted applications and wanted to participate. But I think overall we were quite pleased with representation from throughout BC. Thanks for that question. So next I'm going to talk about the sub-hub number 3, which was on strengthening staff capacity. So here, the broad goal for the sub-hub was to focus attention on the range of supports and skills that career development practitioners need to perform their roles effectively, to encourage individuals to enter the profession, and to support retention and career progression. So because participants in this sub-hub required a detailed understanding of the range of training and supports available to CDPs, the advisory committee agreed to a targeted recruitment process to ensure participants had the necessary domain expertise. So this sub-hub brought together experts who had a thorough understanding of developing and delivering training for career development practitioners with representatives from the employment services sector. In this sub-hub, business process mapping was not used during the initial discussions on improving staff capacity because the issues were more generic rather so much than process-driven. And instead, the Biz Hub team presented more of an overview of the key issues and challenges for increasing staff capacity. And many of you are very well aware of these. So these included things like the disconnect between skills deemed important to specific roles and incumbents' current competencies, preferred approaches to skill development, and perceived barriers to acquiring training. The sub-hub participants then engaged in a roundtable discussion to agree on how to address this issue. So ultimately, they decided to create a CDP infographic. And an infographic was decided upon as an appropriate resource for all new CDPs, as well as those in training, because it would provide an overview of the role, the education required, the skills and competencies necessary, and the potential for development. Different options were considered, but the sub-hub agreed to develop an infographic that could be used to help recruit new CDPs, but that would also form the basis of a conversation about their own career development. The format and content of the infographic was discussed over and over during many sub-hub meetings, and when a final draft was agreed upon, we engaged with a graphic design company to develop the infographic, which you will see on this slide. So this CDP infographic was launched at the BCCDA conference last year in 2018, and there was solid uptake right away. Hard copies of the infographic were distributed at this and subsequent conferences and workshops, and the infographic is also available online at the Center for Employment Excellence's Biz Hub resource page. So we'll give you a link to that page near the end of the presentation. So this infographic represents a collaborative effort across diverse organizations that are invested in the career development sector. It contains key information about the various roles, labor market information, education, training, skills, and competencies. It really acts as a recruitment tool that highlights the exciting features of being a professional in the career development field. So if you're not already aware of it, hopefully you'll have a chance to check it out, and you might find it as something useful to use at your own organization. And I'm going to get right into the next sub-hub, which was our fourth and final one on employer engagement. So again, participants for this sub-hub were recruited from across the province and represented the broad spectrum of employment services organizations. We all know that employer engagement is an important component of the work undertaken by these organizations, and employment organizations essentially have two client groups. So there's employers on the demand side, as well as job seekers who want to find work on the supply side. And the role of employment services organizations is to understand the needs of both clients and employers and to align their needs to find the appropriate candidates for the available employment. So for this sub-hub, the aim of the initial meeting was to identify the focus of the employer engagement sub-hub. And the discussion highlighted that employer engagement is an ongoing and evolving process. One-off events such as trade or job fairs are important, but they were the beginning of an engagement process. Successful employer engagement requires proactive engagement, which demonstrates how the employment services and supports available could benefit the employer. However, we know that many employers are unaware of the range of services available to them. So the group, as you can see in the design stage, they agreed on two innovations. The first was to develop a customizable infographic describing the resources, services, and supports provided by workforce development organizations and distributed to employers as part of their engagement process. The second was to introduce a team huddle to share employer information across staff in a timely manner. Organizations tested the huddle out and adapted it based on feedback from colleagues. So here you see the front side of the employer infographic, and this is NIAS version of the infographic. The development of the infographic really began on day one during that business process mapping stage, and then it saw many iterations. The final versions look quite clean and simple, but I think we have about 30 or 40 versions of the document, which each capture the iterations and suggested improvements. So we're excited to let you know that a customized version of the infographic and rack card with a guide on how to customize it will soon be available on the Biz Hub resource page, the link to which will be shared in the follow-up email to this forum. And again, over to Chris to tell us about NIAS experience with the employer engagement infographic, and then secondly with the team huddles.
Great, thanks, Greg. So I wanted to share for our involvement in this process to begin with our office, or within our office, I should say, we had to determine which info about our services or our employer services that we wanted to offer on the rack card. And I found at least that could be a bit of a challenging process because we learned from our employers that there's actually a lot of language on some of our documentation, and there's a lot for employers to take in. So employers in my community at least wanted something that was clean, that was simple, had very impactful information, perhaps even some infographics or numbers on there so the employers could see how best it would benefit them. And from there, we learned that, again, we just had to boil down our services really into a few simple bullet points that employers could have as a takeaway during our visits or any info sessions or presentations that we decided to offer. One of the things that we saw was, again, it reaffirmed in our community that employers are very busy and with that want something that's clean and simple and doesn't bog them down with too much information, and ideally as well a bit of contact info so that after they see those services and read a little more, they can actually take that and phone us or stop by the office with any questions or any other inquiries that they wanted to have. And from there, we, in terms of what changes we made, we saw that this card, or this format, I should say, could actually be offered on all of our marketing materials that we have in the community, whether it's employer services, disability services, job development, and just overall office brochures in the public from there. And as well for the huddle, I do want to share that in terms of involvement, it was actually pretty easy in my office. I was able to just connect with our leadership team to just explain a bit more about the project and what the infographic and huddle process looked like, and from there was granted the ability to do this. So in terms of involvement as well, employer services can be very busy with many staff and many moving parts as part of the process. As we have staff coming and going from the office to engage with employers in the community, as well as just with job seekers coming into the building to ask questions on employers and look for any job leads from there. But we wanted to see a method in which we can get all of that info in a very quick, informative process so our team could get that and react from there on out. And what I saw was, as we're sharing employer info, whether it's labor markets, employer leads, projects, things like that happening in the community, that our staff had bought into that as it served as a good system to start off with. And how we did this was we actually started this first thing in the morning, just moments before our office opened, leading into minutes after the doors opened to the public, so our staff could all be on the same page and go from there with assisting our clients and employers coming into the building. This process for us began as a bi-weekly process, and from there, as needs of our business change, the method can be changed to go every week, bi-weekly, or there on out as needed.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we've heard from Chris about some of the specific changes that NIAFS has made to their processes and procedures. And given Chris's active involvement in several areas of Biz Hub, we thought we would like to take a step back for a moment and hear from Chris about whether these small changes really made a difference, and if so, how. So this is a great time. If anyone in the audience out there has any questions for Chris, please submit them. Haley and I are monitoring questions coming in on the panel, and we hope to be able to include some of those in our conversation here. So I'm going to turn over to Chris, and Chris, I'm going to ask you, did Biz Hub actually make a difference for NIAFS and for NIAFS business? And if it did, how did that happen?
So thank you, Greg. I can say that yes, the Biz Hub project did make a difference for NIAFS and the staff as well as myself. And one of the things that I could take away from the process was the topic of organizational effectiveness. So as the needs of our businesses within the Work BC model change, so too we have to streamline processes. And knowing all of the working parts of the Biz Hub system can actually be implemented into how we do things every day. And from there, we've learned that, again, as the business needs change, our clients change, and the needs of our employers change, we actually have to be adaptable to that. So I found the whole process extremely valuable, and there's honestly things I can take away from the entire project to implement in my day-to-day work within the office.
That's great, and I think one of the things that I'm trying to think of some of the questions that folks out in the audience might have, or maybe how to implement things practically at their organizations and for steps that they would want to take. So when you brought this idea of the various changes that you were going to try out at NIAFS from the couple of sub-hubs that you were involved in, can you tell me what was the response from your colleagues? Was there a bit of hesitation at first, or any kind of resistance, or were they quite open to it from the beginning?
Our staff was open to it right from the get-go. We had zero hesitation on the project and everything it entailed. And every time I was able to bring on a discussion topic on a potential nudge to implement within the office, I had full support from the staff and leadership team to go ahead and do that. And our staff, as we saw during some of the sub-hubs, particularly client engagement, were also bought into the process. And from there wanted to participate as well. And some of those processes resulted in other partnerships within the community. And we still have those community partners commenting on to us how powerful the Biz Hub project was.
Great. It's in talking about the team huddles specifically, Can you tell us a little bit more about how it looked at NIAFS? So how long was it? When exactly did it happen? When was the best time and to kind of fit it into the day? And yeah, what was the length of the huddle?
Well, the huddle length would depend really on the topic or what was happening that day. So this was started, if I can think back, within the summer months. So in our office, in my community at least, our office was a little quiet, which was a great time to implement this nudge because we had time to morph and adapt it as needed. And the process would begin as early as 20 past 8, sometimes 9, or sometimes 8:30 on the dot. And length, again, could be 5 minutes, could be 10, 15, depending on what the topic was. on certain things happening in the community. From there, we actually had an agenda that I was able to go through on specific points that I wanted to mention to staff. And after a while, I would say the agenda just became memorized it as how I did things, so I could go into that huddle method at any point of the day and just go through those topics one by one.
Excellent. So I just want to get back into the morning huddles, which were from one of the innovations from the second sub-hub, the staff engagement sub-hub.
Mm-hmm.
And at NIAFS, you did the morning emails.
Yes.
And I think one of the interesting things that came up when we were the team here was talking about kind of developing, the content for today's forum was we learned that you no longer are doing those, and that in some way, you stopped doing that for different reasons, but it shows that you really looked at your processes that may not be the best fit for NIAFS at that time, and then you went on to try something totally new. And we all thought that was really cool because it shows that you were able to adapt and adjust, and you really use, I think, and implement a lot of the core elements of Biz Hub, in the sense that you tried something, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and then if it doesn't work, then you try something new or try to adapt it. So how did that look, and maybe tell me a little bit more about making that change from doing the morning meetings to the one-on-one?
Yeah, so as the process happened, our staff initially wanted that communication, and what that good morning email showed was, again, which members of the leadership team were on, who to go to for what concern or query, any community events that needed to be listed, or policy updates and things like that. And then as I shared that over time, our staff were open to saying that it was just another email amongst the many emails that our team can receive on a daily basis. And from there, it was adopted that we move on to something else. So we stopped the good morning email process and replaced it with huddles. And those huddles were broken down into certain teams within the office, the first and foremost being our finance team. Again, where the team leader that looks after finance would connect with her team members on a daily basis to assign tasks, assign projects, find out who is doing what, and continue on from there. And then, as I mentioned, that spilled over into disability services, where those folks that are job developers or customized employment specialists can again meet in a very simple, quick format to go over any programs or any thoughts that needed to be actioned. And after that, we implemented a different level of general staff meeting, where we can have a general staff meeting or a case manager or employer advisor meeting, I should say, with just those folks, or even a meeting just with our leadership team. So we learned that we could customize the entire process to the audience that we're meeting with. So it's a very fluid process. And as you say, because of our involvement, we learned as well how to be resilient and adaptable in the process, and it's paid off in dividends for us.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that the goal of the huddle was to give a forum so that issues or things that people were finding challenging were addressed before they became problematic. So by meeting with your staff and checking in, then you were able to say, okay, that's an issue, we need to deal with it, or we can park that and move on to something else. So that was the joy and the benefit of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I want to add, it's the start of the conversation,
Yeah.
because these huddles are supposed to be brief, right? And
Great. Chris, I want to, maybe before we move on to lessons from Biz Hub, I just wanted to ask you about any advice you might have for folks on the line today that might be interested in getting involved and trying some of these things out. Do you have any advice for them on how to get started with the approach mentioned in Biz Hub, and kind of any first steps that you think they might consider taking?
I think if anyone is interested in how to make small or even medium to large size business improvements within their agency, to connect with any member of the Biz Hub team, and from there just find out about how the project work and all of the methods tested out within it. I would say as well that anyone that is open to this level of change, I guess it could be scary, it could be a little exciting all at the same time, but I do want to let people know that these processes are all very valuable, and if anyone had any concerns about how to implement or action a change within their office, I'm certainly open to connecting with people to share not only NIAF's experience, but maybe offer any tips or pointers on things that can happen within their agency or center.
So I think we'll leave it at that for now. Thanks so much, Chris. I am going to let folks know that if you do have any questions specifically for Chris or for the team in general, we still have about 15 minutes, so please continue to send those in. We've had a couple of questions that have come in. One was about the literacy levels chart, which you would have seen a few slides earlier, and someone was asking about that specifically. I don't think we quite addressed what the chart was in this presentation, but it shows the literacy levels of adult Canadians in BC. And I'm not sure, I'm just going to try to go back to that slide so you can get another look at it. So this shows the literacy proficiency.
So Greg, I'm going to pick up this.
Sure.
Can you go back one more slide? So the first step of the literacy review process was to raise awareness about literacy needs in your centre. So the Dakota staff started off, they visited a staff meeting, and they provided all the staff who attended with information about how they could recognise literacy challenges and actually how widespread these challenges could be. Next slide, Greg. And this was one of the slides that they used just to say that there are different literacy levels across BC, and we get so confident, or we assume that everybody can read and write and understand the information. And this was just to say that actually, hold on a wee minute, that assumption might not hold for everyone. So there are people who struggle with understanding and English and processing it, and it's just to say that, you know, not everyone has the same level of English proficiency. Does that help?
I think that answers the question more. Thanks, Barbara.
Sorry.
But it's a nice segue now into, we'll keep it, the mic on you, Barbara, and to discuss the lessons from Biz Hub.
So you've heard about some of the great work that was accomplished as part of this project, and the achievement you've heard about is the result and hard work of collaboration from all those who took part, and Chris is one of the 30. It was very exciting to be part of Biz Hub, and a very big thank you to all of our participants. I want to finish our presentation by talking about some of the lessons we've learned, but before I do that, I want to remind you that Biz Hub was a new and innovative project, and it did bring together staff from employment service organisations with the goal of sharing knowledge and expertise to improve business processes within and across employment organisations. We at Biz Hub, we provided the framework, we provided the approaches and the tools and the support, but the participants did the heavy lifting. The improved business processes, or the nudges that developed, were, as you've heard this morning, were small and low-cost changes that were straightforward to implement. And at Biz Hub, we tried very, very hard to adopt a pragmatic approach to implementing the nudges, and supported organisations to tailor changes to fit their contexts. So with that in mind, the key lessons were, from Biz Hub were, that it did raise organisational and staff capacity to problem solve in a collaborative and systematic way with a user-centric approach. So organisations and their staff have extensive knowledge and expertise which they were able and excited to use to overcome the challenges to improve effectiveness and efficiency. As I said, we provided some of the support, but the participants were enthusiastic to learn from each other, and they were empowered to make a real positive difference. Biz Hub also encouraged organisations to view challenges and solutions collectively and holistically, so that what you change in one aspect of the organisation has knock-on effects. Some of the best insights and innovations occurred when participants took a step back and considered the challenge from different perspectives, including from the organisation, from staff, from clients, and from employers. Across the sub-hubs, organisational data was used to identify the bottlenecks. Organisations have a wealth of data, a wealth of implementation and outcome data, which, if used appropriately, can support improvements in business processes and in outcomes. In combination with this information, we used evidence from best practices, which we adapted to develop the nudges that you've heard about. And the nudges, as I've said, were not complicated to implement. They were simple and straightforward. And participants were often surprised at the impact that these small changes had within their organisations. So I think I would say to you, don't be afraid to think outside the box. And really and truly, small changes can make a very big difference. So while these lessons are important and speak to the improvements in organizational processes, however, we think that some of the real impact of Biz Hub goes beyond that. It was the creation of an intentional space for collaborative and creative problem solving. It was about empowering practitioners with the resources, with the tools and the supports to identify and to solve business process issues. It was about increasing the capacity and the confidence of practitioners to innovate and develop strategies to address issues. And we find that when this happens, you can achieve great things.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. So as mentioned, here is the link to the Biz Hub resource page where you can find the resources and tools from the project, or simply Google Biz Hub resource page, and it should be the first one that you see in your Google search. So that ends the formal part of our forum today. We do have some time left to take your questions. I think we've done pretty well in addressing the questions that have come in so far. Like I said, my colleague Kaylee and I are watching the panel, but we're going to give you, while I wrap up here, maybe one more minute to pose any questions that are on your mind. And you can see here our contact information. If something comes to mind later on, feel free to send us an email. So, I mean, it's hard to believe that our almost an hour together has come to an end. On behalf of Susanna, Barbara, Chris, and myself, I would like to thank all of you for attending and participating. A reminder that today's forum was recorded, and you will receive an email next week with a link to view it. We will also be sharing the slide deck in that email. So one question that's come in before I wrap things up for good here is how much time each week did participants devote to Biz Hub? So we know from what folks said in that actually participated in the sub-hubs that it ranged within the range of about 30 minutes to an hour each week. But maybe Chris, I'll just ask you, given that you were involved in a couple, what was the time commitment like for being involved in Biz Hub?
Relatively low for the first couple of sub-hubs, and it could be a half an hour to 45 minutes a week. As I went through up until the fourth hub, obviously within the fourth hub, my level of participation was quite a bit different, and therefore for me was an hour to maybe a couple of hours per week, depending on the needs of the hub and some of the questions that arose from some of the members that participated in there. But overall, it did not impact my general working week whatsoever.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So no more questions are coming in, which means I think it's the appropriate time to just say one last thank you to each of the 30 or so Biz Hub sub-hub participants, as well as our project advisory committee and the ministry for its investment in Biz Hub. It's been quite a journey over these 3 years, and we've learned a great deal from and with all of you. So that officially ends our time together. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.